I was born too late to explore new lands and a bit too early to explore the stars above. But I was born just in time to explore those crazy Deltarune theories and memes. But let me tell you, these Deltarune theories can get pretty crazy. I mean, I thought other game theories like Zelda theories can get wild, but the Zelda franchise doesn't have things like determination or WD Gaster going for it. Oh, wait, that's Undertale, not Deltarune, and they're not connected, right? So, they're totally connected, don't believe what other people say. If you've played Deltarune's brand new Chapter 2, then no worries, you can safely watch everything in this video without concern for spoilers. But if you haven't played Chapter 2, or Chapter 1 for that regard, and are concerned about spoiling the story, then consider this your one and only spoiler warning for the entire video. Now, with that out of the way, I want to bring attention to one very particular, very peculiar detail that's brand new in Deltarune Chapter 2 specifically. I'm assuming that most of you watching this are familiar with Undertale and the characters from that game that are making an appearance in the world of Deltarune. In fact, pretty much everyone has resurfaced in the new game at this point except for one extremely major character, Asriel. Well, kind of. See, he's spoken about positively by seemingly everyone in the light world, since he seems like he was quite the go-getter and friendly kid about town when he lived at home. But that's just it. Asriel's memory and influence was restricted to the past in the light world where he lived. Obviously, the majority of the game so far takes place in the RPG-esque dark world, where only items and people brought into the fountains from the light world exist. This was proven somewhat in Chapter 1, but explicitly proven in Chapter 2 off the bat, when Kris and Susie enter the school dark world, but find it empty except for Ralsei. Ralsei asks Kris to go back to the light world and grab a bunch of cards and board games, and when Kris returns, bada bing bada boom, the dark world all of a sudden is filled with things and people. Going off of this fact alone, you might be tempted to think that the dark world isn't a real world at all, but rather just good old youthful imagination from some school classmates using items and toys around them. I mean, Kris is a huge fan of D&D, and Susie and Noelle continually refer to the dark world as a dream in their Ferris wheel ride. But due to several other factors, we know that while the dark world might feel like a fake world influenced in a big way by its location and contents in the light world, it is in fact a real world that multiple people can go to and experience and remember after the fact, and in some cases carry their experiences with them to the light world. If you continue down the alternate route, aka the weird route, aka the Snowgrave route, you get proof of this because Noelle uses Snowgrave, a lethal ice attack that the route is named after, on the party's fellow classmate, Berdly, and it kills him. Or at least completely incapacitates him, even after returning to the light world. Everybody else comes back, but Berdly just doesn't wake up after the fountain is destroyed. And after this, it's assumed that the party then stuffs him into the nearby closet. Yeah, pretty dark stuff. But this is all typical of Toby Fox games. In addition to experiential proof that the dark world exists, there is also the existence of the single strangest character in Deltarune. Besides the clown and the glitchy salesman, of course. Ralsei's entire existence is so bizarre because even when the dark world is emptied of inhabitants and all its fountains are closed, Ralsei strangely still lives on. We know this because in Chapter 2, after Kris and Susie closed Chapter 1's dark fountain, Ralsei apparently worked non-stop on making Kris and Susie some rooms in his castle while the duo were in the light world. He was able to make multiple complete rooms in a single day, but attributes it to the fact that apparently he never stopped working since they left. And even stranger is that Ralsei can exist in other worlds created by other dark fountains, even though no other darkeners can do that. Ralsei is the one who explained that darkeners can't exist away from their fountains, and we see Lancer turn to stone in front of our eyes because this fact is true. Yet Ralsei, a member of the original Dark Fountain, not only crossed over into this new dark world, but exists here just fine indefinitely. But I'm saying all this to prove that the dark world is both influenced majorly by the light world, but is a completely real place at the same time. Now let's bring this back to Asriel. Obviously there's some kind of extremely strong connection between Asriel and Ralsei. I mean, they look exactly the same, well, mostly the same, and Ralsei is intricately familiar with Kris and Susie and the light world in general, and their names are anagrams of each other. So this means that Asriel didn't actually go off to college and that he's actually been here the whole time trapped inside the dark world as Ralsei, right? Well, maybe. I mean, I guess that is a possible theory, but that's not where I was going with this one. At one point, I did believe that Ralsei was none other than Asriel, for the aforementioned obvious reasons, but now I no longer consider that to be the case, and it's all because of the Queen's castle. Specifically, the holding rooms inside of the castle. Specifically, the last room. Asriel's room. All of a sudden, for the first time in either chapter of this sequel to Undertale, Asriel and Ralsei are both independently referenced inside the Dark World, proving to us that these two characters are in fact different from one another. Otherwise, it would just have been called Ralsei's room, or Ralsei's name would just have been Asriel in the first place. Toby Fox has proven to be very particular over and over again with the way that he reveals story details to the player base, so you know that this was deliberate. To make things even weirder, when Kris tries to peek inside Asriel's room, as they are able to do with all the other rooms before, Kris doesn't see anything inside. But it's not because they can't, it's because they won't. In an extremely strange and telling detail, Kris closes their eyes when peeking into the room. This unwillingness to see on the other side of a doorway fits with several other places in Chapter 2. Along your journey throughout the cyberworld, sometimes the party will come across door frames that are seemingly empty, where there's no door in the frame, but yet the other side is just black or blank. So this begs the question, what is on the other side of these doors, or specifically the other side of Asriel's door, that Kris refuses to see? And does this mean that they're connected? As far as I can tell though, Asriel's real bedroom, which is also Kris's bedroom, is completely visible in Toriel's house, leaving very little to the imagination. Just a bunch of trophies and a computer and some secrets hiding under the bed, you know, normal teenage guy stuff. What could possibly be inside the room that Kris so blatantly does not want to see that's not there in his real room? I'll get to that later on in the video, but I have a bunch of stuff to set up first so that it'll make sense. See, Toby and team placed that door here in Chapter 2, wanting players to see it and read that Asriel has officially and for the first time not only been referenced in the Dark World, but is a different person than Ralsei altogether. The puzzle that I think we need to tackle first isn't the contents of Asriel's Dark World room just yet, but rather Ralsei. Like I mentioned earlier, pretty much everything about Ralsei is weird. His permanent existence within the Dark World without having a Light World counterpart, his detailed knowledge of Kris and Susie and the schoolhouse layout in the Light World, and his ability to exist away from his own dark fountain or without it entirely. And the mystery of Ralsei is pretty much non-solvable until you see what happens at the end of Chapter 2, when it reveals to us that the Roaring Knight, the blade-wielding dark fountain opener, is probably none other than Kris themselves. Or I guess Kris's body, maybe? The part of Kris that doesn't include you, the player, the soul. All of a sudden, Ralsei's existence begins to make a little bit of sense. See, Kris creates dark fountains where they were not previously located. They create dark worlds that were not previously existing. According to Queen, this is something that all Lighteners are apparently able to do, yet Kris's body is the only one that knew that fact previously or is shown doing it at all. So presently, we can assume that Kris is the Knight and has always been the Knight, since Kris's body has been going off doing shady stuff on its own for quite some time now, long enough to have gained a reputation with the dogs in Undyne's jailhouse. If you think about it, being able to create entire other dark worlds means that you can also create dark world inhabitants, right? I'm sure you can probably tell where I'm going with this by now. Because Ralsei's weirdness seems to revolve around Kris, what if that means that Kris created Ralsei? Specifically Kris, without the soul, without you. Now, okay, forewarning, things are about to get really weird and speculative, and I'm about to mix in some Undertale stuff, so if you haven't already, buckle your seatbelts. If Kris created Ralsei, that would answer lots of questions about Ralsei's weirdness going on, since his existence outside of his own dark world can just be attributed to Kris's presence. Or his appearance and knowledge of Kris's schoolhouse and friends would have come from Kris's own mind. Not to mention the seemingly intimate concern Ralsei has for Kris, and the somewhat intimate moments that the two share on the Swan boat ride are both a bit too familiar for friends that have only known each other for 2 days, right? So if Ralsei was born from Kris's own mind, the question is, why? I'm so glad you asked. Here's where things are about to get really crazy. See, we know that Kris was pretty close to their brother, Asriel. In fact, they were really close, and Asriel's gone off to college, leaving his little sibling Kris behind. This has no doubt made Kris feel really lonely, as any little sibling would be, speaking from experience there. But it goes further than that. Have you ever noticed that there are no humans in Deltarune? Contrasting with the world of Undertale, where monsters lived in their villages in darkness under the surface, in Deltarune there are only monsters living on top of the surface in the light of the sun, except for Kris. Even Kris's immediate family is composed of all monsters and not humans. Now, I'm getting somewhere with this and it'll all make sense, so hold on. To get some more information on the subject, let's refer back to the world of Undertale for some parallels. In Undertale, Toriel and Asgore have 2 children together. Asriel, their biological child, and another adopted human. This human child is not Frisk, the player. This human child has existed long before the events of the game that you play through, and their name is Chara. Up, I hear you rolling your eyes. Before you get too turned off at introducing Chara into the mix, just watch till the end. This will make sense, I promise you. As many fans have pointed out since day one, Kris from Deltarune shares many blatant similarities to Chara, although appearing to be a slightly older version of the original character. While the color black is used to outline objects in Deltarune, Kris's sprite's dark tones are colored in with a dark brown instead of black, similarly to Chara. The single stripe green and yellow sweater shirt that Kris wears is also of a similar style and color to Chara's single stripe green and yellow sweater shirt, and their hair is worn very similarly as well. Not to mention the creepy smile that Kris flashes sometimes, or the iconic knife that they wield sometimes like Chara was known for. But there's no way this is Chara, right? I mean, from Toby's own words on the Deltarune website, Deltarune is not the world of Undertale, right? I mean, he says that deliberately. Well, let's read into what he says a bit more. See, it was always so strange to me that Toby would say so much to say so little. If it was as simple as, no, it's a different universe, then why not just say that? Instead, he kind of dances around and confirms that there are connections between the two worlds and says specifically that if people were happy in Undertale, they'd still be happy there now. He also emphasizes that specifically Undertale's ending has been left untouched, and that Deltarune is meant for people who have completed Undertale as a spiritual sequel to the former. Let me ask you a really serious question. Do you remember what happens at the end of Undertale's Genocide route? Do you remember that you, the player, Frisk, gave Chara your soul to reset the universe? Now, how Chara was able to reset the universe isn't really important here. I mean, maybe they partnered up with Gaster, who's shown to be speaking at the beginning of the new universe of Deltarune, but that's another theory entirely, so let me know if you'd like for me to go into my thoughts on that particular subject in another follow-up video to this one. Anyway, it is a fact that Chara has reset the world and has received your soul, the player's soul, at the end of the Genocide route. One might say that the world was reset and is immediately replayable by opening the game again, which is a closed case, which does happen, but do we honestly think for 1 second that Chara, as evil as they are, cares so much about you, the player, that they would reset the world of Undertale only back to when Frisk fell down in the underworld? No. I think that maybe Frisk falling into the underworld is somewhat of an inevitable future, or maybe just a closed time loop. But I think that Chara ultimately resets the world back to when Chara was happy with it, when Chara lived with Asriel and their parents, and Chara asked for your soul because it was necessary for them to come back to life and live once again in the past with their family. And once this happened, their name was changed from Chara to Kris, which is almost Frisk, but not quite. But since Chara was reborn as Kris in their original time with all the knowledge of what happened the first time around, what if Kris was able to avoid becoming terminally ill as Chara and instead is able to do what they wanted to do in the first place with the power of Frisk's soul? And after Kris destroyed the humans, they moved their family and the other monsters to Chara's original village with the golden flowers and trees instead of remaining underground, and sealed the doorway shut, explaining the mysterious door to the south of the village, and which is why Kris is apparently the only one who knows what's behind the door and asks all the other monsters to keep out. This reset world theory with the other humans destroyed and monsters moved to the surface also fits in with Toby's words on the Deltarune website, since the good ending of Undertale, the pacifist route, would indeed remain untouched as Chara would never have received the player's soul. Additionally, it makes sense that it would be the same soul as the player soul in Undertale, since after all, Toby said Deltarune was designed for people who have played Undertale, right? Theoretically speaking, the vast majority of Deltarune players will have played Undertale previously, meaning that either way, the player's soul in Deltarune is probably the same soul as your player's soul from Undertale, because you are the link between the two. It also explains several other things, such as why the menu looks the exact same as it does from Undertale in the Light World, or why Kris would be physically older than Chara in Deltarune. If Chara got their way and killed the humans and saved their beloved older brother and now gets to live on with their monster family, why wouldn't they be okay with living on and growing up? And they were, until Asriel left. I think that this is the key for this entire theory. When Asriel left Kris behind, Kris's body, Chara, couldn't take it. They needed Asriel, their only emotional link to this world, so they did something about it. They removed you, Frisk, the player's soul, from their body, once again becoming Chara and wielding their iconic knife. But because they need a soul to live, they slump around heavily like a zombie and can't last too long without reclaiming their player's soul, which is what they needed to live again in the first place. However, Chara is able to function freely long enough to create dark worlds, which are literal RPG worlds full of imagination, just like the D&D games Kris and their brother used to play, which is what they miss so much, and then created a clone of their brother to play with. Asriel, reborn as Ralsei, in the image of when they first met Asriel as a younger monster, when Chara first fell down to the underworld. Only Chara named Ralsei instead of Asriel because their brother's real name would remind them of the reality, which is that Asriel is gone, moving on with his life, never to return home for good, meaning things will never be the same as they used to when they were kids. And finally, what if Ralsei, who is a creation of Chara's own mind, knows the truth, and knows that he himself is a clone of the real Asriel? He still cares about Kris since he's a duplicate of Asriel and therefore loves his little sibling, but he wants Kris to know the truth. That's why Ralsei seems so happy to see Kris, but also oddly so sad at the same time. That's why he discourages Berdly from extending this world of lies, his own world, and creating more dark fountains at the end of chapter 2. And since we know Ralsei can change things around and literally create rooms in the dark world without Kris's knowledge and unnaturally and supernaturally quickly, what if Ralsei has some sort of creation power in the dark world and he's the one who's placed the strange blank doorways around the dark world, and perhaps even created his counterpart Asriel's room in the Queen's palace, where, notice, he was deliberately not taken prisoner but allowed to roam the castle freely. This would explain why he keeps finding ways to separate himself from Kris in order to create these rooms, which always seem to randomly pop up right in the way of where you're supposed to go, meaning you're supposed to find them. The final question is, why would Ralsei create the rooms, and what's on the other side of the doors? Well, what if what's on the other side of Asriel's room and on the other side of these other doors isn't something physical, but rather is the truth about Ralsei, the dark worlds, and Asriel? As the player, you may want to see inside these rooms, but Chara closes Kris's eyes every time, making you see blank, unwilling to uncover the truth about the brother they cherish so dearly. That's why Chara keeps ripping you out of their body and opening new dark fountains when Ralsei clearly wants them to stop. It's all because of the first fallen human, the little child named Chara, the one who only cares about what they want, who loves their brother so much that they are unwilling to let them go. Of course, this is all just my theory though. What did you guys think? There was a lot to unpack in this one, but do you think any of it carries water? Is Kris really Chara reborn with the player's soul that was given to them at the end of Undertale? And did Ralsei create Asriel's door of truth to force Kris to see the truth? Or is this all just another Undertale Deltarune theory fever dream? Let me know in the comments below. Also, huge thanks for watching. This was my first time covering Undertale or Deltarune on the channel, but as a huge fan of the series, I'd love to continue onward. Let me know if you enjoyed it and if you'd like to see more from me on this series. Also, please leave a like below if you liked the video and subscribe if you haven't already for much more geeky stuff to come. Huge kudos as always to my Bandit crew, and I have an apology to make actually. Dear Clifford Longhead, I apologize so much for missing your announcement in the last one. I have no idea what happened, but I wanted to make a special welcome for you in this video. Thanks so much for joining up, and if anyone else is interested, please feel free to click on that join button located below. That's about all I've got in this one, so as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This is maskednintendobandit, looking forward to seeing you again and signing out. Peace!